Yeah, so in this video, I'm going to be breaking down how I made this scene right here. So I'm going to show you how I did all the textures, lighting, how I modeled certain things, yeah, where I got certain assets from, and just overall how I put it together from scratch. So let's get into it. Okay, so the first thing I need to point out is this is a version after Photoshop. So straight out of Blender, it looks like this. So maybe I'll do a separate video on Photoshop for post processing renders, but for now, let's just focus on this and how I got this far. So I've just hidden everything except for this main room here and a light. So I think what I'll do is I'll just kind of bring in objects piece by piece and go through kind of what I started with and how I added stuff and built it from the ground up. So this is what I started with. This looks kind of maybe complex and weird, but let me just show you what this is. Basically, it's a cube that I took and did a bunch of insets, extrusions, and bevels somewhat randomly and just messed around with it until it looked cooler than just a basic cube. So that would have been like, you can just kind of select faces, inset things, extrude things up, add like loop cuts, select this, like extrude it, and just create a lot of variation and complexity just by basically moving little pieces around until it's more interesting than just a basic cube. So another thing I did a lot was select edges, hit Control B to bevel. By default, it's going to look like this. So let me just, if you hit Control B, it'll look like that. You might have to apply the scale first. So let's just do that again. Control B, and then if you click, it'll bring up this menu here, and you can just, if you increase the segments to like 20-ish, and then change the profile type over to custom, whatever shape you draw in here is going to get translated onto your bevel here. And you could just draw some weird squiggly kind of shape, and it'll just get put onto all the edges that you bevel. And then any new edges you select here and hit Control B, that same bevel will be saved for whatever you do here. So that's a really easy way to just fill in details on all like edges like this here and around here, just using that custom bevel. And then yeah, you can see there's just lots of little extrusions, insets, extruding again, inset again. Just kind of repeat that until you have something that's just more interesting than a basic cube kind of shape. So I'll get into the lighting in a second here. So if I just start bringing stuff in here, let's just kind of go through this piece by piece. So this is kind of using the same technique I just showed you with taking a basic cube kind of shape and just manipulating it with bevels and extrusions into something that's a bit more complex than just a flat kind of slab here. So same thing, I would have just taken a cube, or let's do that over here. Taking a cube, maybe scale it down, just grab faces, inset things, extrude things down, inset again, extrude it up maybe. Just kind of repeat that and add some bevels on top of it until it looks cool. So let's apply the scale, bevel, and that custom bevel is going to be applied again here. So yeah, you can kind of just grab some of these edges, bevel again, and then there you go. There's something kind of more interesting than just a flat like slab of stuff here. So if I just duplicate that, once you have one piece here, you can kind of duplicate it a bunch of times, scale it up, rotate it around, and then you can even take like a cluster of objects that you've made, duplicate that around, and before you know it, it's you're just filling up your scene with all these details just made from one little piece here. So if I start bringing in all these other objects here, you can see it kind of looks complex when you look at everything at once, but when you break it down into its individual pieces here, it's just a bunch of very simple shapes that I've manipulated with some extrusions and bevels and duplicated pieces around a bunch of times. And you can see here just like this piece, for example, this kind of longer one here is used like so many different times in here. And doing this it's kind of a good way to make everything feel cohesive and like it's all part of the same space. Reusing the same geometry in different places in like different parts of this piece. It does kind of make it feel like it's all sort of part of the same thing. And that goes with the textures too. If we look at the textures, I like to keep this very simple. So this is just a texture I found on Quixel Megascans. And for the UV wrapping for everything, I just did a cube project. If I just go to the UV editor here, and if I hit U on the keyboard and then press C, it'll just unwrap this here. You can see it didn't even change. I just left it on its default settings there. But all this stuff, I would have just... here, let's bring this in. So yeah, all this stuff, I would have just grabbed A to select all, U, C, and the UV unwrapping is done, basically. And maybe I think for this one, I scaled it up and like rotated it 90 degrees so it lined up a bit better. But yeah, UV mapping for this kind of stuff, and most scenes that I do, like it doesn't have to be complicated at all. Just cube project works for like almost everything. Even you can see the statues and stuff in here. That's pretty much all cube projected, and it works well for the scene because everything is kind of box or like square shaped. But even for scenes without that, cube project works for like 99% of things. Let's move on here to the next thing here. So I guess lighting. Whenever I start a scene, the first thing I like to do is get the lighting set up. Lighting and camera angle usually. So let's talk about lighting first. So you can see here, if I just go here, there's only 2 lights in the whole scene. So if I just hide these 2, it's just pitch black. There's just nothing in the world settings here. And if I bring this back, let's kind of go through this and I'll show you what I did here. Yeah, so with lighting, I like to just minimize the amount of lights as much as possible. So sometimes I'll even just use 1 light in the whole scene. So the way I like to do this is I'll just add 1 at a time here. So I think I added the spotlight first, and then what I'll do is I'll just add it in and kind of move the positioning around here, rotate it, play with the brightness, and just find an angle that works with the scene that you're building. So there's no real science to it or anything. You just kind of move it around until you find a spot that looks good and where it kind of highlights all the things that you want to highlight in your scene. So I did that a couple of times. So I did it with that one I just showed you and this area light over here. Just trying to find the perfect angle with 1 light at a time. And I found that it worked better having these 2 together, so I just went with that. And I think the next thing I did was add some volume in here. I do this a lot in my artwork, so you can see here, adding volume is a really nice and easy way to add just a lot of depth to your scene and atmosphere. So if I take that off, you can see how much of a difference that makes there, just adding that bit of volume in. This is just a cube over the whole scene with a volume scatter node and just the density set to like something really low. That's going to be different for every scene, but you just got to play with it and find something that works for the scene that you're building and the image that you want to create. So this doesn't matter here. This can be set to 0 for this scene. Sometimes it looks cool to turn it up, but in this case it didn't really do much here. All right, let's move on to how I did this water in at the bottom here. So basically, if you've ever tried to make water in Blender, you probably just take like a principled shader, turn the roughness all the way down, and then turn the transmission all the way up. So that's in here, but there's some extra stuff I did on top of that to just get the light to pass through it better. Yeah, so let's look at that. Here it is. So it's just a plane, or it's just this kind of box here at the bottom of the scene that's kind of covering the whole floor. So what this is, it looks kind of complicated, all these nodes here, but There's some unnecessary stuff that's going on here. I think this doesn't really matter. So I kind of boiled this down to just the nodes that are actually important here. So what's happening is to create all these little ripples in the surface, like you can see here. I'm just using a Musgrave texture. A noise texture can work too. And you just run that through a bump node and just make sure you turn down the strength and distance to something really, really low. Otherwise, it's going to look too extreme and unrealistic. You don't need a lot of this. Just a little bit is enough to make it look convincing. So that's just running into this principled shader here. This is all default settings except the roughness is all the way down and the transmission is all the way up. So you can run that straight out into your output, but I learned this trick here from, I think it was from Ian Hubert, or it might have been Blender Guru, where if you mix between this and a transparent node here, transparent is just going to be completely invisible. So mix between that and just invisible with this light path node here. So what that's going to do is it's going to let a lot more light run through the surface here and hit all the geometry that's underneath it. So all those stairs and stuff that I added earlier, I still want to be able to see that through the water. So this lets us do that. And you can just add this if you bring up the add menu, Shift A, search for light path, and you'll find it right there. If you just take the top output there, is camera ray, and you run that into a mix shader and mix between that transparent and that regular water shader over here, that's how you get it. You might have to flip these two things around to get it to look right. But that's pretty much it. It's just a nicer glass or nicer water shader. And then you just run that out into your material output here. One other thing I did for the water here is I took a principled volume, and that's going into the volume output of this same material. So you can see in the final thing, kind of the deeper that this water gets, the more murky and blue you can see it getting there. That's just taking a principled volume. It's all default settings. This, I don't know why that's down. You can set that to 0. But it's just the same thing. Lower the density, change the color to whatever works here. In this case, I found a nice kind of blue, just looked cool here. So I went with that. And then, again, just run that into the material output of the same water shader that you're working with here. And since it's going to be this box that's covering from like the top, the surface here, past like through the floor here, the volume's going to just cover all that. Okay, so let's move on to how I did these like waterfall things in the middle here. So this, I kind of wanted to do a long exposure type of look here, just with water pouring down through the middle. So what I did was I just added a cylinder here. And then if I just take the translucent by itself, you can see this is what that looks like. Just a regular translucent shader. Transparent, again, is going to be completely invisible. And then we're mixing between those two things using just a noise texture. And that's running through a color ramp to ramp up the contrast here. I'm just bringing the black part of this up a little bit. You can see what that's doing there. But I think this is just a default noise texture here. I don't know why the W is up. That doesn't really matter. But the way you get it to be stretched out vertically is if you, when you add your cylinder here, it's going to be like, it's regular scale like this. But when you just stretch it out on the Z-axis, that'll stretch the noise with it. And you can see here I'm not using like the object coordinates or anything like that. You can see if you do that, you'll get just noise that's like uniform, like a uniform scale all over it, which is not what I want here. So if you just take that off, or don't worry about it at all, and let the noise stretch with the model, then that's how you get that kind of downwards flowing look. Okay, so at this point, so we have like a basic outline for what the scene is going to look like. The lighting's there, the volume's there, most of the main objects are in here. So this is where I would go in and start adding smaller details to kind of fill out empty space. So I have these pillars here. This is where the having a nice asset library comes in really handy because um, you could just drag and drop little objects in here that feel like they belong and just really easily fill out the space with objects that make sense here. So like these pillars here, I made this a long time ago and I just dropped it in here from some other project, and you can see that just adds a lot of detail and a bit more complexity to all the walls here. So I just dropped in one, set up like an array here, and then just duplicated that all over the walls. And then yeah, if I just enable this, all this extra stuff here, you can see when I get to this stage, I kind of just think about like if you're not sure what kind of stuff to fill out your scene with, I think a good way to do that is to kind of just ask, like, what kind of stuff would you just find laying around here? So this is kind of a ancient temple-y kind of scene. So I just thought, like, okay, maybe we can have some statues, some like ancient-looking pots, and just stuff that feels like it belongs here. So yeah, again, these I just made a long time ago and reused them in here. This thing right here is from, I think, from Ian Hubert's Patreon, one of the assets he gave away. This statue is from Sketchfab. And then I think I just took the same material that's on everything else and just kind of put it on these two. Yeah, you might have noticed that I used the same material on like almost every single object. And sometimes it looks lazy if you do that, but sometimes it actually works really well to just, again, make everything feel cohesive and kind of glued together like it's all part of the same space. But it depends on like the context of your scene. All right, I think that covers everything I wanted to show you here. So I hope you learned something. Let me know if there's anything else you want me to cover in future videos. Yeah, bye.